Picture the moment when the greatest army on earth realizes that 300 men have just declared war on their courage itself. I want you to feel that chill crawl up your spine, because I felt it too, just listening to the tale. The dawn over Thermopylae wasn't just light breaking over mountains. It was history cracking open like an egg. And there they stood, 300 Spartans, motionless as statues carved from pure stubbornness. I can almost hear what the Persian scouts whispered to each other. No. When they first crested that ridge, their reports must have seemed like madness. My lord, there's a line of shields blocking the way. But they don't look afraid. Can you imagine being that messenger, knowing your words might cost you your head? The thing about fear is that it's contagious. But so is courage, and these 300 men were infected with the deadliest strain of it. Their red cloaks weren't just fabric, they were liquid fire against a gray stone. Each man stood shoulder to shoulder, but somehow, they seemed taller than the cliffs themselves. And then it started. Not the clash of swords or the scream of battle, something far more terrifying. A drumbeat, slow, deliberate, boom, boom, boom. The heartbeat of an empire suddenly unsure of its own pulse. I need you to understand what this meant. Xerxes had brought 500,000 men across continents. He'd burned cities that refused to kneel. And now, 300 men were telling him no. The drumbeat wasn't coming from the Persian lines. It was coming from the Spartans themselves. Each strike against the earth was a promise. Each vibration a question posed to the universe. Are you worthy to pass? The morning mist began to burn away, and with it, any illusion of easy victory. The pass at Thermopylae isn't just a crack in the mountains, it's a wound in the world where legends are born. And these 300 men, they were about to pour salt in that wound. But here's what haunts me. Every time I tell this story, the Persians weren't just facing 300 warriors. They were facing 300 ghosts, conquering who hadn't died yet. Every Spartan who'd ever fallen in battle stood with them that morning. The drumbeat quickened. Not faster, but whisper, deeper, like the earth itself had joined their defiance. And somewhere in that rhythm, in that impossible heartbeat of 300 against 500,000, something shifted. I wish I could tell you what happened next was glorious. I wish I could say it was heroic. But the truth is far more terrifying, because the greatest army on earth was about to learn that courage has a sound. And it's not the sound of victory. It's the sound of 300 heartbeats daring an empire to silence them. But that is where our story truly begins. Because while 300 hearts beat in perfect Spartan rhythm across the sprawling Persian camp, another kind of counting was happening. And trust me, it was far less poetic. The imperial mathematicians had gathered in the grand pavilion, their scrolls unfurling like desert sands across silk carpets. One man, his beard dyed the same imperial purple as his robes, stood before a massive map drawn in saffron ink. 300 Spartans, one for every mile of empire stretching from the Indus to the Aegean. The ratio struck them as hilarious. 1 Spartan per mile, he announced, like placing a single grain of sand to hold back the sea. The tent erupted in appreciative murmurs. Even the cupbearers snickered behind their hands. But as night deepened, something shifted in the air. The laughter began to taste metallic, like blood on the tongue. In the lower ranks encampment, a young soldier named Arash tossed restlessly on his wool blanket. He'd drawn first watch at the hot gates tomorrow. Lucky him. And sleep refused to come. Then came the dream. Not the usual kind where you wake up sweating and forget everything by morning. This one clung like frost. He saw eyes. Not human eyes, but something ancient and red, watching from the fog that pooled between the mountains. The eyes didn't blink. They simply waited, patient as stone, while something that might have been breathing echoed across the pass. When Arash jolted awake, screaming apparently, half his tent mates were already reaching for their daggers. The officers, of course, dismissed it as pre-battle nerves. Dreams, sneered Captain Artafernes, are for women and philosophers. But that night, other soldiers began dreaming the same dream. Always the eyes, always the fog, always the sound of footsteps that matched their heartbeat perfectly. By dawn, the scouts who'd been sent to survey the pass returned, different. Their horses were lathered white with foam, though they'd barely ridden 3 miles. The men themselves, normally bronzed and boastful, looked like they'd aged 10 years overnight. The pass is empty, reported their leader, a veteran named Mardonius. But the echo, he trailed off, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The echo what? Demanded General Hydarnes, his patience wearing thin as silk. Mardonius swallowed hard. The echo follows you, sir, even when there's nothing to make it. We stopped our horses, completely still, and still heard footsteps, marching, like an army just behind us that wasn't there. The tent fell silent. Even the mathematicians stopped their calculating, because numbers, you see, don't account for things that can't be counted. They can't quantify dread or measure the weight of unseen eyes. 300 Spartans might seem mathematically insignificant, but mathematics has never faced men who count shadows instead of sheep. That afternoon, something happened that would chill the blood of every Persian who witnessed it. The fog lifted, briefly, revealing the Spartan line across the narrow pass. 300 men standing shoulder to shoulder, their red cloaks hanging like blood against the gray stone. But here's what made seasoned warriors step backward involuntarily. Their shadows moved independently of their bodies. Just slightly, just enough to suggest that perhaps the mathematicians had been counting the wrong things entirely. And as the sun began its slow descent, painting the mountains the color of dried blood, the Persian camp grew quieter than any military encampment should ever be. Because somewhere in the gathering dark, between the tents and the tethered horses, something was definitely counting back. But that's a story for tomorrow's watch, if anyone's still here to tell it. And so the sun abandoned us, sliding behind the black teeth of the mountains like a thief fleeing the scene. I remember the hush that fell over the Persian camp. No hammering tent stakes, no barking officers, not even the usual grumble of bronze on bronze. Just the wind threading through canvas and the nervous snort of horses that knew something we did not. That's when the sentries first heard it, a metallic chorus rising from the pass, as if 1,000 shields were being clapped together by invisible hands. They raised torches, trembling like children in a ghost story, but the light caught nothing except drifting ash and the gleam of abandoned helmets, ours, crumpled inward as though a titan had pressed a thumb into each crest. I was standing near the royal pavilion when the runner arrived, breathless and chalk-faced. He stammered that the sound had stopped the instant the torches touched it, like a song cut off mid-note. Xerxes did not shout. He simply stared at the mountains as if they had insulted his mother. Then he turned to the captain of the immortals and said, in a voice soft enough to skin a peach, "At dawn, you will take 1,000 of your men, and you will walk into that pass until you stand upon whatever is making that noise, and then you will bring me its tongue." The captain bowed, but I saw his hand shake as he touched his heart in salute. Night thickened. Fires refused to catch properly. The flames leaned sideways as though listening to something in the dark. I crept among the tents, pretending to check the watch, but really, I was counting heartbeats. Everyone's raced, mine included. Every so often, a low metallic clatter rolled down from the hills, not louder than dice in a cup, yet sharp enough to slice conversation in half. Once I passed a young spearman clutching his father's amulet and muttering numbers, 300, 301, 302, as if arithmetic could hold the world together. I asked what he was doing. He looked up with eyes like cracked ice and said, "Counting how many heartbeats until morning, sir." I left him to it. By midnight, the camp's mood had curdled. Veterans spoke of dreams that felt more like memories. The immortals, reclining on embroidered rugs, drifted into uneasy sleep, and all saw the same thing. A river, broad and black, its surface made of overlapping shields. Each man dreamed himself stepping forward, armor dragging him down, water closing over his crested helm. When they woke, always at the exact same instant, mind you, they found their palms wet, not with sweat, but with cold dew smelling of iron. I checked my own hands. They were bone dry. Lucky me. I wandered to the picket line, where the horses stood rigid, ears swiveling like radar dishes. Their eyes caught the moon and threw it back green. One stallion, a brute that had kicked a Macedonian's teeth out at Issus, now trembled so hard his tack rattled like distant thunder. I whispered nonsense to calm him, but he only stared past me at the pass, nostrils flaring at something I could neither see nor smell. Somewhere behind us, a bronze cauldron overturned by itself, clang, and every horse jerked so violently, the picket master nearly lost an arm. That sound, the sentries later swore, came from inside a tent that had been empty since evening. Dawn was still 3 hours away when the sky began to lighten, not with sun, but with an aurora the color of old blood. It rippled above the peaks like a banner soaked in wine. Men stumbled from their tents, half-armored, pointing skyward. One old engineer, half-deaf, half-mad, laughed until his beard shook and said, "That's the glow of a forge, boys. Something up there is heating shields until they sing." Nobody corrected him, because at that moment the clashing began again, louder, closer, as if the mountain itself had unsheathed a hidden army of bronze. I ran to the edge of the camp where the immortals were forming ranks. Their captain stood before them, helmet tucked under his arm, speaking in a whisper I had to strain to catch. He told them they were the finest soldiers the Empire had ever bred, that their shadows alone could conquer cities. Then he added, almost apologetically, that if any man wished to remain behind, now was the time. Silence, not a single step backward. Courage or denial. Sometimes they wear the same face. The captain raised his hand, ready to give the order to march, when the aurora suddenly folded in on itself and vanished. Darkness slammed down so hard we felt it in our bones. In that instant, every torch in the camp snuffed out, every one, leaving only the faint ember of our fear. And from the pass came a single, deliberate footstep, metal on stone, slow, measured, heading straight for us. No second step followed, just that one, hanging in the black like a question mark. The captain's arm froze mid-gesture. Somewhere behind me, the young spearman whispered, 367! Then the wind shifted, carrying a smell of salt and deep water, impossible this far inland. And that, my friend, is where I leave you, on the edge of the first nightmare, with the taste of the sea suddenly thick in our mouths and the dawn still refusing to come. Because what answered that single footstep wasn't 1,000 immortals. It was something that counted heartbeats in reverse. The taste of salt was still burning my tongue when the trumpet screamed. Not the clean brassy note of our own horns, but something shriller, like metal tearing. And then, through the gray pre-dawn, came the sound that had frozen empires from the Indus to the Nile, the measured drumbeat of the immortals. They advanced in perfect squares, 10,000 shields catching what little light the sky would give them. At 20 paces, close enough to see the gold threads on their tunics, they stopped as one. The silence that followed was worse than any war cry. I felt my heart stutter, counting against some internal clock that wasn't mine. 367, the boy had whispered. Now every beat felt borrowed. The immortals' front rank raised their spears, 18 feet of ashen iron, yet the Spartans did not move. Not one foot shifted. Not one breath seemed to escape. We are statues carved from stubbornness and old bronze. The wind carried that impossible sea smell again, stronger now, like the tide itself had marched inland to watch. Then, on some signal none of us heard, the phalanx lowered spears in perfect unison. One heartbeat, one sound, like a giant door slamming shut on the future. The front rank of immortals faltered. I saw it, saw their knees bend when they should have lunged, saw the hesitation ripple through their ranks like a stone dropped in still water. The second line collided with the first, shields clashing against backs, spears tangling in cloaks. In that stumble, fear became contagious. Their commander, tall even by Persian standards, shouted something in a tongue I didn't know, didn't need to. The panic in his voice translated itself. Here were the vaunted immortals, the king's own guard, and they were backing up. One step, then two. The Spartan line hadn't moved an inch. I realized I was holding my breath, counting heartbeats backwards now. 366, 365. Each number felt like a small death. The immortals tried to reform. I watched them rearrange their squares with the mechanical precision of a jeweled clock, but something had broken. Their perfect rhythm now carried hesitation in every beat. A younger Persian, I could tell by the way his helmet sat too loose, glanced toward the tree line as if wondering why the earth itself hadn't swallowed these mad Greeks. His neighbor dropped his spear. Just let it fall. The sound it made hitting the ground was louder than any trumpet. Behind me, someone whispered the count again. 364. The voice cracked. I turned to see the young spearman from last night, his face pale as parchment. He wasn't looking at the enemy anymore. He was staring at our own shadows, which had begun to stretch backward toward the sea, as if the sun itself had decided to retreat. The salt taste grew stronger, almost metallic now, like blood mixed with ocean brine. The immortals charged, not the disciplined advance we expected, but a ragged sprint born of desperation. They covered 10 paces before the Spartans finally moved. Not forward, but sideways, each man sliding half a step to his right, opening gaps that shouldn't exist, then snapping back together like the jaws of some ancient trap. The first Persian to reach us impaled himself on 3 spears at once. The sound he made wasn't human. It was the sound bronze makes when it remembers it was once earth and ore and wants to return. I felt the impact through my feet, through the bones of the earth itself. The immortals' momentum died against our wall like waves against cliffstone. They pressed forward, but now they were climbing over their own dead, each body becoming a small hill to scale. The smell wasn't salt anymore. It was iron and fear and something else, something that made the hairs on my neck stand up like the crest of an angry dog. The young spearman beside me started laughing, a high broken sound that had nothing to do with joy. And that's when I noticed the shadows weren't just stretching backward. They were moving on their own, pooling between the Persian ranks like spilled oil. Something was counting with us. Not Persian, not Greek. Something that had been waiting since the first nightmare began. The immortals saw it too. I watched terror bloom across their faces like frost on metal. They weren't retreating from us anymore. They were running from what stood behind them, in the spaces where dawn should have been. The trumpets screamed again, but this time they sounded like questions. The sun had climbed to its cruel height now, and the heat pressed down like a giant thumb trying to erase every living thing. I could feel my armor turning into a stove, baking the sweat against my skin until it ran in rivulets down my spine. The battlefield had become a furnace built from bodies. Persian corpses were stacked so high they formed new ramparts, a second wall of flesh behind the stone one we had started the morning defending. And from those piles came voices, not the groans of the dying, whispers, clear as morning bells. "Turn back," they said. "Turn back before the count reaches 300. I gripped my spear tighter until the wood creaked in my fist. Around me, other Spartans were doing the same, their eyes wide, their breathing shallow. Polydorus, the youngest among us, actually took a step backward. The boy who had laughed at death an hour ago now looked ready to bolt like a deer. "They're just wind," I told him, but my voice cracked like old timber, because we both knew the pass had been still as death itself. No breeze, no birds, just those words, sliding between the bodies like serpents. Then the trumpet sounded from the Persian side, not the wild blaring of attack. This was different, hesitant, almost polite. Through the shimmering heat, I saw him, Xerxes, the king of kings himself, riding forward across the corpse-strewn ground on a black horse that looked carved from obsidian. His golden armor caught the light and threw it back in cruel daggers. Behind him, the immortals parted like wheat before a scythe, their faces turned away from something none of us could see. That's when it happened. The thing that would haunt my dreams until the day I finally joined the Whisperers, Leonidas's helmet. His bronze helm, the one we'd placed atop a spear near the front line as a standard. It moved. Slowly, impossibly. The helmet turned on its spike, inch by inch, until the empty eye slits were staring directly at Xerxes. Not at his horse, not at his army, at him, the king of kings. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could see my breath misting in front of my face, though the sun still burned overhead. Xerxes here stopped dead, its nostrils flaring, its eyes rolling white with terror. The king himself sat frozen, one hand raised to give what should have been the final order, the order that would send 10,000 men to finish what 2 days of battle had started. But his hand stayed there, suspended in the golden air like a bird caught in amber. Around us, the whispering grew louder. 276, the voices said. 277. Counting, always counting. The dead were keeping time with our heartbeats. I looked at my left hand and realized I could see through it, just for a moment, just enough to glimpse the bones beneath. Then it was solid again, and I wondered if I'd imagined it. But Polydorus was staring at his own hands with the same expression of horror. The immortals had stopped their advance entirely. They stood in perfect formation, but their eyes were no longer on us. They stared at the spaces between themselves, at the shadows pooling at their feet despite the noonday sun. And from those shadows rose shapes, not men, not quite, tall and thin, like smoke given form, with too many angles and not enough substance. They walked among the Persian dead, bending low as if listening to secrets. Xerxes finally lowered his hand, not to signal attack. He simply let it fall to his side, as if the weight of it had become too much to bear. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the pass like winter wind. "What manner of men are these," he asked, "who count their own deaths like treasures?" The question hung there, unanswered, because we didn't know either. We only knew the whispers were getting louder. 289. The numbers came faster now. 290. I could feel each count like a drumbeat against my ribs. The shadow figures were turning toward us, their smoky faces tilting as if they could smell our fear. Wah! Somewhere in the pile of Persian dead, a hand moved, just one, rising like a drowning man reaching for air. The ring on its finger caught the light, and I recognized it. It was the hand of the Persian officer who'd fallen yesterday, the one who'd laughed as he died. Now his finger pointed not at us, but past us, toward the hidden path, the one we thought they'd never find. They were coming from behind us now. The count was almost finished, and Xerxes, the king of kings who'd never shown fear in his life, was backing his horse away from our line. The whispers rose to a chorus, 299. I looked at my brothers in arms and saw understanding bloom in their eyes like black flowers. We knew what came next. We just didn't know who would be left to hear it. The second night fell like a hammer on bronze. No sunset, no gradual dimming, just a sudden weight of darkness that pressed the breath from our lungs. We Spartans had learned to love the dark, but tonight it felt borrowed, as though Persia had rented it from some older god, and the interest was murderous. I took my place on the line where Stelios had stood the dawn before. The stones were still warm with what had been him. I refused to step aside. We rotated in silence, each man trading post with the precision of a funeral drill. No words, just the scrape of bronze against volcanic grit. Our blades had no right to stay sharp after what they'd done, yet the stones obeyed some Spartan law and gave back an edge keener than yesterday. I watched old Dianakes work his xiphos in slow figure eights, the steel whispering secrets to the night. He caught my eye and offered the ghost of a grin. Steel's like truth, boy. It don't care who holds it. I found myself nodding, though my stomach was a fist of ice. Across the narrows, the Persian camp had shrunk to coals. 10,000 fires the first night, maybe 5,000 now. Each missing blaze marked a family that would never see their son again. Yet what remained still outshone every star. I could hear them, not words, just the low surf of voices, wondering why the pass itself seemed to breathe. They'd begun to believe the hot gates were alive and hungry. Good. Let them feed it, kings. An hour before midnight, A single arrow crossed the gap. No war cry, no trumpet, just the hiss of cedar and goose feathers seeking flesh in the dark. We ducked by reflex, then waited for the thud or scream. Instead, the arrow returned, feather first, quivering in the throat of the archer who'd loosed it. I swear by the twin gods, it flew back along the exact path, as though the knight had grown bored and spun the shaft like a child's toy. The Persians nearest the corpse began to back away, forming a circle of empty space around the twitching body. Their whispers rose to a nervous hymn. "The pass takes what it gives," someone muttered. Another answered, "and gives what it takes." They were talking about us like we were ghosts already. Morale is a fragile thing in any tongue. I'd seen it shatter in our own ranks once, long ago, when wolves circled the Agage. But watching the Empire's finest bowmen cross themselves with foreign signs made my skin prickle with something between pride and pity. The King of Kings could flog every prophet in Asia, yet superstition spreads faster than any wound. By the time the moon reached its peak, half their campfires were ringed with salt and muttered charms. They stared not at us now, but at the black mouth of the pass itself, convinced it would swallow them next. I found myself counting heartbeats again, not ours, but theirs. Each distant cough, each snapped twig, carried across the void like a drum. 299 of us left breathing, yet the Persians numbered still in the tens of thousands. Madness, some would say. But madness has its own mathematics, and tonight the ledger favored the mad. I pressed my palm to the cliff wall and felt a faint vibration, steady as a war drum. The hidden path. They were closer than the whispers warned. I could almost smell their fear riding the wind ahead of them. The rotation came again. I traded places with Aeson, a boy barely old enough to grow a beard, who'd lost 2 brothers yesterday and hadn't spoken since. As he passed, he brushed my arm and whispered, "Tell them I sang." Then he was gone into the dark before I could answer. Clear's throat. I took his post at the very lip of the Narrows, where the air tasted of iron and old endings. Somewhere below, a single Persian voice rose in prayer. The words were foreign, but the tremble was familiar. We all tremble when the gods lean close. Midnight passed, and with it came the silence that isn't silence at all. It's the sound of 1,000 men holding their breath at once. I felt the hair rise on my neck before I heard anything. A soft scuff of sandal on stone, not from the Persian side, but from behind. The hidden path. They'd found it. I turned, squinting into the dark, and saw nothing. Yet the air itself seemed to ripple like heat over bronze. My hand found Aeson's shoulder where he stood 10 paces away. His muscles were coiled so tight they hummed. Then came the smell. Cedar oil, Persian leather, and something sweeter. Lotus, maybe, or the perfume they burn for their dead. It drifted down the cliff face like an invitation to massacre. They were already above us, looking down. I could feel their eyes crawling across my back. The count in my head faltered. 298? 297? I couldn't remember who'd fallen last. The numbers were slipping through my fingers like sand. A pebble bounced past my foot, dislodged from somewhere high and unseen. It rolled to rest against my greave, innocent as a child's marble. Yet every Spartan along the line stiffened at the sound. Somewhere in the dark above, an empire was holding its breath, waiting for the signal that would end us. And somewhere behind me, a song began to sing, soft, tuneless, the song of a boy who knew his next heartbeat might be his last. I strained to hear the words, but the wind snatched them away. The cliff face sighed, a long exhalation of stone and ancient malice. I looked up into blackness so complete it felt like staring into the mouth of the underworld itself. Somewhere up there, the Persians were gathering for the final push. Somewhere behind me, my brothers sharpened blades that refused to dull. And somewhere between us, the pass itself waited to decide which story would be told. I gripped my spear tighter, feeling the wood sweat with my own fear. The second night was almost over, but the second betrayal had only just begun. The wind still tasted of iron when the sky began to pale, a sickly silver bleeding over the cliffs like old scars reopening. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, counting down the final heartbeats of night. 300 left, maybe 299. Each one sounded like a drum inside my skull. Then the earth itself began to tremble. Not from the wind this time, from hooves. The Persian cavalry came in a rolling wave, horses so close their manes braided together in the charge. I saw the first rank leap the trench we dug overnight, saw their eyes wide with the madness of riders who believe numbers make them immortal. They learned different. Our spears met them like the jaws of a trap, snapping shut. Wood splintered, bronze shrieked, and men screamed in languages I'd never bothered to learn. It was beautiful in the way broken things sometimes are. Behind them came the elephants. Imagine a wall of gray flesh taller than a house, tusks lacquered and tipped with iron. The ground shook so hard my teeth clacked together. Their drivers wore gold masks shaped like snarling dogs, and I swear one of the beasts looked straight at me with an eye like a dying sun. We'd prepared for this. We'd drilled for this. Nothing prepares you for the smell, wet hide, musk, and the sour stink of animal terror mixing with human. Our front line knelt, second line raised spears, third line held torches soaked in pitch. The elephants reared, trumpeting, and for one impossible heartbeat the entire pass went silent. Then Xerxes sent his immortals, 10,000 men who had never known defeat, marching in perfect lockstep, their robes the color of dried blood. Their commander rode beneath the royal standard, an eagle stitched in gold thread so fine it looked alive. That standard had flown over 23 nations. That morning it flew over the dead. I stepped forward without thinking, breaking formation like a fool. My shield felt lighter than air. My spear balanced on my palm like it wanted to fly. The standard-bearer saw me, raised his own weapon in mocking salute. I hurled. The bronze tip sang through the air, parting smoke and screams alike. It struck a man's cheek, slicing through silk and flesh, carving a line of crimson that splattered across the golden eagle. The standard dipped, just for an instant, just long enough. The effect rippled backward through the Persian ranks like a stone dropped in still water. Men who'd marched across continents suddenly hesitated. One cut cheek, and an empire remembered it could bleed. Leonidas, our king, our brother, laughed then, a wild sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. He stepped past me, shield resting easy on his arm, and called out in Persian so clear it carried over the clash of arms. "Tell your king he faces free men." The immortals faltered. Just one step, one heartbeat, but we saw it. We all saw it. The sun finally crested the cliffs, painting everything the color of old wounds. I could taste copper on my tongue, didn't know if it was mine or someone else's. Behind us, the pass had narrowed to a throat that could swallow armies whole. Ahead, the Persian line reformed, slower now, heavier. We'd held longer than any man had right to hope, but I could feel it in my bones. This was the breaking point, not of our bodies, of their belief. And belief, once cracked, shatters like ice in spring. I gripped my spear tighter, feeling the grain of the ash wood warm against my palm. Somewhere above us, a single eagle circled against the pale sky. I wondered if it was a sign. I wondered if signs mattered anymore. Then I heard it, a sound like nothing before, not the thunder of hooves, not the scream of men. Something else, something worse. And from the cliffs behind us, a single horn note blew 3 times. The betrayal had finally found its voice. The horn died against the rock like a man choking on his last breath. I spun, heart already knowing what my eyes refused to see. Persian helmets pouring through the goat path, sunlight flashing off iron like 1,000 tiny mirrors. The betrayal had not just found its voice, it had learned to sing. And the song was death. We formed the lambda one last time, tighter than brothers, closer than fear. Leonidas stepped into the center, bronze helm cracked, cheekpiece hanging by a single leather thong. He did not speak of glory. He spoke of breakfast fires we would never light again. Even now, the man could make me smile. The first wave hit like a waterfall of men and metal. Spears splintered, bones snapped. Someone screamed my name, but the sound was swallowed by the roar. I felt a Persian blade kiss my ribs, hot, then cold, then nothing. Time narrowed to the space between heartbeats. They kept coming, Always coming. I lost count after the seventh man I killed in the same square foot of ground. My shield split. My spear broke. I used the jagged-ass shaft like a dagger, carving memories into flesh. Somewhere in the crush, I saw Dienekes laughing. Actually laughing, as he took a spear through the thigh. He looked at me and shouted, "Now we're even," before pulling the Persian forward and biting his throat. Gods, the madness of it, the pure shining madness. Then the sky fell. Arrows. So many they blotted out the sun, just like the old joke. I felt one punch through my shoulder, another graze my scalp. The world tilted. I was on my knees, tasting copper and mountain dust. Leonidas stood over me, shield locked with two others, forming a roof of bronze. He looked down once, just once. His eyes said everything his lips never would. We were done, but not finished. The final push came like the sea claiming the shore. I remember the sound, not the clash of arms, but the sudden, awful silence when the last shield broke. I was on my back, staring at the eagle again. Funny, it hadn't left, just circled, waiting. A Persian stood above me, spear raised, and in his eyes I saw it. Not victory, not triumph. Wonder, terror, the look of a man who has seen gods bleed. I smiled, couldn't help it, and whispered, "Tell them in Susa, we kept the gate." The spear fell. But stories do not die with men. They echo, they march. Xerxes walked over our corpses into Greece, but every step he took sounded like 300 heartbeats just behind him. His men glanced back at shadows that weren't there. His dreams filled with the clash of bronze that never stopped. Years later, when the empire crumbled and the gates of Persepolis burned, old soldiers swore they heard laughter on the wind. Our laughter. Because we never fought for land or glory. We fought so that somewhere, sometime, a Persian would hesitate, just for a heartbeat, and in that pause, Greece would live. The past is quiet now. Wind moves through the bones like memory. But listen closely, very closely, and you'll hear it. 300 heartbeats, still marching out of step with the world. And always will.